After a devastating emotional betrayal, Clara decides to give Raphael one last chance. But as they renew their vows, she uncovers a secret that could change everything she believed about love and forgiveness. The rain fell relentlessly outside, drumming against the windows as if echoing Clara's tumultuous thoughts. The small living room was submerged in twilight, lit only by the cold light of Raphael's phone screen, which he had carelessly left on the table when he went to the bedroom. Clara wasn't in the habit of snooping through his things, but that night something bothered her. A subtle discomfort and intuition. Hesitantly, she picked up the device. Her trembling fingers slid across the screen until they found an open message notification. The words were there, cruel and undeniable. A conversation that, though it didn't explicitly suggest a physical meeting, was deeply intimate. The betrayal seemed more emotional than physical, but that didn't make it hurt any less. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her quickly drop the phone, her heart racing. Raphael appeared at the door, his hair still wet from the rain that had caught him on his way home. He smiled, but the smile faded the moment he noticed Clara's gaze. "What's wrong?" he asked, furrowing his brow. Clara didn't respond immediately. Instead, she stood up and crossed her arms, trying to find the strength to say what she needed to. The room felt smaller, the walls closer. Finally, she broke the silence. "I saw the messages," she said, her voice firmer than she felt. Raphael blinked, confused for a moment, before realizing what she was referring to. His shoulders sagged, and he let out a long sigh. He didn't deny it, didn't try to deflect. He just shook his head. "It was nothing," he started, but Clara interrupted him. "Nothing. You're calling someone else my confidant. Someone who understands me like no one else does." "Raphael, what did you expect me to think?" The tension in the room was palpable, as if the rain outside had invaded the space, making the air heavy and suffocating. Raphael tried to approach, but Clara took a step back. "There's no excuse for this," she continued, her eyes welling with tears. "If it wasn't physical, it was still emotional, and that hurts just as much. You knew what you were doing." He ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with himself. He knew there were no words that could fix the situation at that moment, but he tried anyway. "Clara, I was lost. That doesn't justify it, I know. But it was just a moment of weakness. I never meant to hurt you." "But you did," she retorted, her voice finally breaking. "And now, what do I do with that?" The storm outside seemed to intensify, reflecting Clara's inner chaos. She turned her back on Raphael, unable to face him for another second. She climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last, until she slammed the bedroom door shut. Inside, she let herself sink into the bed, the tears finally flowing freely. In the living room, Raphael remained motionless, feeling the weight of his choices as though the ceiling could collapse on him at any moment. He knew he had crossed a line, and that regaining Clara's trust would be a long and difficult path. And so, on that rainy night, something broke between them, something neither of them knew at that moment if it could ever be repaired. The days following Clara's discovery were marked by a thick silence that seemed to envelop the house. The rain had stopped, but the atmosphere between her and Raphael remained heavy, like a sky on the verge of another storm. Every exchange of glances was laden with unspoken words, and every movement in the same space was avoided whenever possible. Clara spent hours on the living room sofa, her gaze lost in the window, where the first rays of sunlight began to appear after days of overcast skies. It was as if the world outside was ready to move on, but she couldn't. The weight of what she had uncovered remained firmly in her chest. Raphael, on the other hand, tried to carry on with the routine as if nothing had happened, though his steps down the hallway were hesitant, almost timid. He observed her from a distance every morning as she held a coffee cup forgotten for minutes, not taking even a sip. The sound of the blender or the clinking of cutlery in the sink seemed to disturb the fragile peace they both maintained. That afternoon, Clara decided to go out to clear her mind. She put on a light jacket and went to the neighborhood park, a place she and Raphael used to visit on weekends. Walking alone along the trails, she felt his absence like a hole in her chest, but she couldn't ignore the lingering sense of hurt that still throbbed within her. The trees swayed gently in the wind, but even the beauty around her couldn't calm the storm raging inside. She found herself thinking about the messages again. The words she had read on Raphael's phone repeated in her mind like an incessant echo, each phrase eroding the trust they had spent years building. How could he seek comfort in someone else? How could someone who claimed to love her expose himself in such a way? When she returned home, she found Raphael sitting at the kitchen table. He looked more worn out than in the previous days, with dark circles under his eyes marking his face like fresh scars. He looked at Clara as she entered but said nothing. Still, there was something in his eyes, a silent apology he hadn't yet found the courage to speak. Clara set her bag on the counter, hesitated for a moment, and then broke the silence. "I don't know if I can move forward from this, Raphael," she said, her voice soft but heavy with emotion. "I don't know if I can trust you again." He took a deep breath, running his hand over his face as if searching for the right words. "I don't expect you to forgive me overnight," he began, his voice hoarse. "But I want to fix this. I want to fix us." She let out a bitter laugh, looking away. "Fix? Like it's that simple. You broke something I don't even know can be repaired." The conversation ended there. Clara didn't have the energy to continue, and Raphael didn't have the answer she was looking for. Night fell once again, bringing with it more hours of solitary reflection. However, as Clara closed her eyes that day, she realized something. Despite all the pain, there was a part of her that wasn't ready to give up. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it wasn't an end either. The morning arrived lazily, filling the house with a soft light that stood in stark contrast to the weight in Clara's chest. She woke up early but didn't go downstairs immediately. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring into nothingness, trying to make sense of the emotional mess her life had become. The silence around her was almost deafening. When she finally went downstairs, she found Raphael in the kitchen, already dressed for work. He was holding a cup of coffee but seemed more interested in his own thoughts than the drink. Noticing Clara, he tried to force a smile, but the gesture faded quickly. "We need to talk," she said bluntly. Raphael nodded, carefully placing the mug on the table. The sound of the cup against the wood seemed to echo through the kitchen, breaking the tense silence. "I know," he replied softly. Clara pulled out a chair and sat at the table, keeping a safe distance between them. She studied Raphael for a moment, trying to decipher the emotions playing across his face. He seemed different, vulnerable in a way she wasn't used to seeing. "I want you to tell me the truth, the whole truth," she began, crossing her arms. "Why did you do it?" Raphael hesitated, running a hand through his hair before speaking. He knew this moment would define their future, and he couldn't hide behind half-truths. "I don't know how to justify it," he finally said. "It was selfishness, insecurity. A weakness that has no excuse. I was feeling disconnected from everything, even you. And instead of talking about it, I sought validation elsewhere." The words hung in the air like a heavy confession, and Clara felt a lump form in her throat. It was hard to hear, but she needed to. She needed to understand what had led Raphael to betray her trust. "So it's my fault?" she asked, her voice trembling. Raphael quickly shook his head. "No, not at all. I never wanted to hurt you, Clara. And I know that sounds hollow now, but I love you. I've always loved you. It's just that," he took a deep breath, looking away. "I've been carrying things from my past that I never shared with you." Clara frowned, confused. "What things?" Raphael remained silent for a moment, as if gathering the courage to speak. "When I was a child, my father had an affair, and I saw what it did to my mother. She became bitter, distrustful, and it destroyed our family. I always swore I'd never do anything like that, but here I am, making the same mistake." Clara hadn't expected that revelation. Raphael's past had always been a territory he avoided, but now it made sense. She could see how those old scars had shaped some of his choices. "Raphael, That doesn't justify what you did, she said firmly, though without the harshness from before. But I think I understand better now. You've never dealt with it, never confronted what happened. He nodded, his eyes glistening with tears. No. And that's not an excuse. What I did was wrong, Clara. I didn't want to carry this alone anymore. And I need you to know I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn back your trust. Clara stayed silent, absorbing it all. Part of her wanted to scream, to run, but another part knew there was something there. A possibility for rebuilding. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in days, she felt a spark of hope. I need time, she said at last. I can't promise anything right now, but I'll think about it. Raphael nodded, respecting her decision. He knew it would be a long road, but he was willing to walk it, even if he had to start alone. As Clara stood up to leave the kitchen, Raphael spoke again. His voice filled with emotion. Thank you for not giving up on me. Yet, she didn't respond, but for a brief moment she looked back. There was pain in her eyes, but also something else. The faint shadow of possibility. The following afternoon, Clara decided to find a place where she could sort out her thoughts. She called Sophia, her longtime friend, and asked if they could meet. Sophia agreed without hesitation, suggesting a cozy cafe in a nearby neighborhood where they often talked during tough times. The atmosphere was warm, filled with the aroma of fresh coffee mingling with the scent of freshly baked bread. Clara arrived first, choosing a seat near the window and watching people rushing by outside. She felt disconnected from that world, as if viewing it through a fogged-up glass. When Sophia arrived, her warm smile and comforting hug made Clara feel, for the first time in days, that she could breathe. I knew you needed me, Sophia said, pulling out a chair and sitting down. What's going on? Clara hesitated, looking at her hands clasped on the table. Then, with a deep sigh, she began to talk. She spoke about the messages, the confrontation with Raphael, and finally, his confession. The words poured out quickly, charged with emotion, as though she had been holding them in for too long. Sophia listened intently, her eyes filled with empathy, and when Clara finished, she placed her hand over Clara's. That's a lot to process, Clara. You have every right to feel hurt. But I have to ask, do you think you still love him? The question lingered in the air, and Clara felt a tightness in her chest. It was a simple question, but the answer was anything but simple. I don't know, she finally said. Sometimes I think I do, but other times I feel like he broke something that can't be fixed. Sophia nodded, understanding. After a brief silence, she shifted the conversation to Clara's past. It was a subject Clara avoided, but Sophia knew those memories might bring some clarity. Do you remember what happened with your father? Sophia asked gently. Clara tensed for a moment. It wasn't a topic she liked to revisit. Her father had abandoned the family when she was a teenager, leaving her mother shattered and Clara full of doubts about love and trust. I remember, she replied in a low voice. I think that's why I'm so confused now. I saw what my mom went through, how she never fully recovered. And I swore to myself that I'd never be like her. Sophia held Clara's hands again, her gaze firm and full of affection. But you're not your mother. And Raphael isn't your father. I'm not saying you should forgive him, but maybe it's time to ask yourself what you truly want, and not what someone else's past wants you to decide. Sophia's words stayed with Clara for the rest of the meeting. When she returned home that evening, she felt a little calmer but still full of questions. Raphael's past and hers had become intertwined in a way they both would need to confront. As she climbed the stairs to her bedroom, Clara glanced briefly at Raphael, who was sleeping on the living room sofa. For the first time, she realized they weren't just dealing with betrayal, they were fighting against the echoes of very old wounds. The next morning brought a new atmosphere to Clara and Raphael's home. The sunlight streaming through the windows felt less oppressive, almost like an invitation for something to change. Clara woke up feeling lighter, not exactly ready to make a decision but willing to consider new possibilities. After breakfast, Raphael broke the silence. He was nervous. his eyes avoiding hers as he fiddled with the handle of his coffee mug. "Clara, I was thinking, maybe we could try couples therapy." Clara looked at him, surprised. It was the first time he had suggested something concrete, and it caught her off guard. Not because she hadn't thought about it, but because Raphael had always been resistant to the idea of therapy, believing their problems could be resolved without outside help. "Therapy?" she asked skeptically, though not harshly. It was more of a test, a way to gauge his seriousness. Raphael nodded, finally lifting his gaze to meet hers. "I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to try. I want to learn to be better. For you, for us." Clara hesitated. On the one hand, the proposal seemed genuine. On the other, it meant opening even deeper wounds, exposing her emotions to a stranger. The thought made her uncomfortable, but at the same time, there was something about his demeanor that felt sincere. She decided to give it a chance, at least this time. "All right, we can try." The next day, they found themselves sitting in the small office of a therapist recommended by Sophia. The space was welcoming, with comfortable chairs and a side table stacked with books on relationships and human emotions. The therapist, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a calm tone, greeted them with a smile. "Thank you for trusting me," he said as they settled in. "Today I just want to listen. Tell me why you decided to come." Clara and Raphael exchanged glances, as if silently deciding who would start. Raphael took the lead. "I made a mistake," he said directly. "And I don't know how to fix it." The therapist nodded, encouraging him to continue. "I was emotionally distant from Clara. Instead of dealing with it, I sought comfort in someone else. It wasn't physical, but it was wrong. I betrayed her trust, and now I'm trying to figure out how to earn it back." Clara remained silent as Raphael spoke, feeling a mix of pain and relief hearing him openly admit what he had done. When the therapist invited her to speak, she took a deep breath before responding. "I feel betrayed," she said, her voice steady but laden with emotion. "I can't trust him right now. And honestly, I don't know if I want to." The therapist listened attentively, asking questions that guided them to explore the deeper layers of their feelings. He didn't take sides but helped each of them understand what was at stake. By the end of the session, Clara felt exhausted but also relieved. It was as if an invisible weight had been partially lifted. Raphael, for his part, seemed determined to continue the process. On the way home, the silence in the car wasn't as uncomfortable as it had been before. Raphael glanced at Clara as they waited for a red light to change. "Thank you for agreeing to go," he said sincerely. Clara didn't respond immediately but finally murmured, "It wasn't easy. But I think we need this." When they arrived home, she realized it wasn't just Raphael who needed to change. There were things within her, old scars and insecurities, that also needed to be addressed. For the first time, she considered the possibility that maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. And so, with that small step, a path began to take shape, even if it was still uncertain. Therapy sessions became a regular part of Clara and Raphael's routine in the weeks that followed. Each meeting was a mix of discomfort and revelation. At first, Clara hesitated to fully share her feelings, but over time, she began to understand that true healing would only be possible if she confronted what she truly felt. That afternoon, during a pause in the session, Clara looked at Raphael. He seemed more open, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen in years. It was as if he was finally learning to face the emotions he had kept locked away for so long. "You always said I was the most important person to you," Clara began, breaking the silence. "But when I read those messages, I felt like all of that was a lie. It was as if I were invisible." Raphael lowered his head, feeling the weight of her words. "I know I hurt you," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "And I understand if you can never completely forgive me. But I want you to know that it was never because I didn't love you. It was because I lacked courage." The therapist intervened gently. "Raphael, how do you think courage applies here?" He took a deep breath, clearly struggling to find the right words. "I think I was afraid to show who I really am," he admitted. afraid that Clara would see my flaws, my insecurities. So, I sought validation elsewhere, where I didn't have to expose myself as much. Clara remained silent, processing his words. It wasn't an excuse, but it was a truth she needed to hear. For the first time, she realized that his betrayal wasn't just a reflection of their relationship, but also of his internal struggles. After the session on their way home, Raphael broke the silence in the car. "I want to show you something," he said, deviating from their usual route. Clara, curious, didn't protest. He drove to a park they used to visit early in their marriage. It was a simple place with shaded trails and weathered wooden benches. Raphael parked the car and gestured for her to get out. Walking together, he stopped in front of a specific bench. It had a beautiful view of a small lake where ducks lazily swam. Raphael pulled something out of his pocket, a folded note. He handed it to Clara without saying anything. Curious, she opened the paper. Raphael's handwriting was slightly shaky, but the message was clear. Renewal vows. They weren't overly elaborate or poetic. They were simple promises but full of meaning. He promised honesty, effort, and above all to be fully present. Clara felt tears well up as she read. It wasn't forgiveness she felt at that moment, but a spark of something that might grow into forgiveness. She carefully tucked the note into her coat pocket and looked at Raphael. "I don't know if I'm ready to say I forgive you," she said softly. "But I want to try. I want to try to find something good for us again." Raphael's gaze was filled with relief and gratitude. He knew there was still a long road ahead, but that moment, Clara's decision, was all he needed to keep fighting. As they walked back to the car, Clara felt an unexpected lightness. It was as if, in choosing to try, she was also releasing herself from part of the weight she had been carrying. Forgiveness, she realized, wasn't for Raphael. It was for herself. Clara's decision to try to rebuild the relationship was a small relief, but it didn't mean the road ahead would be easy. As days went by, new challenges began to emerge. For every step toward reconciliation, it seemed another obstacle rose up, testing the couple's patience and determination. Clara noticed that those around her had strong opinions about her choice. Sophia, who had always been her closest confidant, was visibly conflicted. During a conversation at the cafe, her friend finally voiced her doubts. "I support you in everything, Clara, but I can't help but ask, do you really think he deserves another chance?" Sophia asked, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. Clara sighed, feeling the weight of the question. She had asked herself that same question countless times. "I don't know if it's about deserving, Sophia," she replied. "It's about what I want. And right now, I want to see if we can find something new together." Though Sophia respected Clara's decision, she couldn't hide her concern, which only deepened the doubts already lingering in Clara's mind. Every interaction with friends and family seemed to carry a new judgment, even when left unspoken. Meanwhile, Raphael faced his own trials. One day, while at work, he received an unexpected message from the same person he had exchanged the messages with, the ones that had shattered his relationship with Clara. He froze, staring at the screen. It was a simple, casual message, but fraught with danger. Without hesitation, Raphael deleted the message and blocked the contact. It was a small gesture, but a significant one. He knew every decision now mattered, that every step he took had to be in the right direction. That evening, Raphael shared what had happened with Clara, knowing full well it might trigger a painful reaction. "I need to be honest with you," he said as they ate dinner. "She sent me a message today. I didn't respond. I blocked the number. But I thought you should know." Clara set down her fork, surprise evident on her face. For a moment, fear and anger threatened to take over, but then she realized something different. Raphael was choosing transparency, something he had never done before. "Thank you for telling me," she said, making a visible effort to stay calm. "That means a lot." Despite their efforts, external judgments and internal insecurities continued to haunt them. Clara still grappled with the fear that it might all be in vain, while Raphael worked every day to prove his commitment. Even so, as the days passed, small victories began to emerge. A genuine smile here, a lighter conversation there. Progress was slow, but it was real. Deep down, Clara started to realize that the obstacles weren't just tests for their relationship, but also for herself. For her ability to trust again, to allow herself to be vulnerable without losing her strength. It was a quiet evening, the kind Clara used to appreciate before everything changed. The house was silent, except for the faint sound of the television Raphael was watching in the living room. Clara was in the bedroom, organizing some drawers, when she heard Raphael call her. "Clara, can you come here for a second?" His voice sounded hesitant, but there was something else, a tone of anticipation. Curious, she went downstairs and found Raphael standing at the door with a nervous smile on his face. He was holding something in his hands, a blindfold. "What's that?" she asked, frowning. "Trust me," he said with a small smile, extending the blindfold. "I want to show you something." Clara hesitated. Her first instinct was to step back, but there was something in Raphael's expression that made her reconsider. After a few moments of silence, she took the blindfold and put it on. "Fine, but if you take me somewhere ridiculous, you'll regret it," she joked, trying to ease the tension. Raphael laughed, and the lightness in his voice made something inside her relax, if only a little. He guided her carefully to the car, and after a few minutes of driving they stopped. Clara felt the cool night air when they got out, but she still had no idea where they were. "Are you ready?" he asked, gently removing the blindfold. When Clara opened her eyes, she realized where they were. It was the park they used to visit early in their marriage, the same one where he had given her the note with the renewed vows weeks earlier. But now something was different. Ahead of them, under a pergola illuminated by soft lights, was a small table set for two. A bouquet of flowers rested in the center, and a path of candles led the way to the lake. It was simple but absolutely perfect. "Raphael, what is this?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. "I wanted to recreate a moment of ours," he said with a shy smile. "Something that reminds me of when everything was simpler, lighter." Clara felt a wave of emotion wash over her. For a moment, she allowed herself to let her guard down, feeling something close to happiness for the first time in a long while. They sat down, and Raphael served a meal he had prepared himself. Nothing fancy, but made with care. As they ate, they talked about small things like they used to. There was no tension, only a genuine connection that seemed to have been lost over the years. Slowly, Clara began to remember all the reasons she had fallen in love with him. When they finished, Raphael reached for her hand across the table. "I know a dinner doesn't erase everything that happened," he said, his voice filled with sincerity. "But I want you to know that every gesture, every word I say now, is to show you that I won't give up on us." Clara looked at him, feeling tears well up in her eyes. This time, they weren't tears of sadness but something closer to hope. She knew there was still a long road ahead, but in that moment, she decided to allow herself to believe that they might find their way back. As they walked through the park together, the silence between them was no longer heavy but comfortable. For the first time in months, Clara felt that the change wasn't just happening in their relationship, it was happening within her too. The days following the dinner in the park brought a sense of renewal for Clara and Raphael. It wasn't as though their problems had vanished, but something had shifted. The constant weight between them felt lighter, and the silence that had once been a wall was now a space for reflection. They began setting small rules to rebuild trust. Raphael was the first to propose one, always being honest about their feelings, even if it was uncomfortable. Clara, hesitant at first, agreed. She knew that without honesty, any attempt at reconciliation would be hollow. One morning, as they sat at the breakfast table, Clara decided to test this new approach. "I need to say something," she began, stirring her coffee. "I'm still afraid. Afraid that you'll hurt me again." Raphael set his cup down and looked at her directly. "I understand," he replied. "I don't expect that fear to disappear overnight. I just want you to know that I'm here, willing to do whatever it takes to prove otherwise." The conversation didn't resolve everything, but it was an important step. It was a reminder that trust wouldn't be regained through grand gestures but through small, consistent actions. Raphael started sending messages to Clara during the day, simply to let her know where he was or what he was doing. It wasn't about accountability but about showing her he had nothing to hide. Clara, in turn, began to gradually lower the walls she had built. She allowed herself to share her own fears and insecurities, something she had previously avoided out of pride or self-preservation. It was difficult, but each conversation seemed to strengthen the foundation they were trying to rebuild. One afternoon, Raphael surprised Clara with an idea. "What do you think about doing something new together? Something we've never done before?" he asked while flipping through a catalog of local activities. Clara raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Like what?" He turned the catalog toward her, pointing to a group pottery class. "It might seem silly, but I think it could be fun," he said with a slight smile. "Besides, it's a good way to create something together." Literally. Clara laughed, a sound he hadn't heard in a long time. It was a genuine laugh, and Raphael took it as a sign of hope. "All right, I'm in," she replied, surprising both of them. During the class, amid the mess of clay and shared laughter, Clara felt something unexpected: joy. It wasn't just the act of creating something new but the experience of being alongside Raphael, rediscovering a lightness she thought she'd lost forever. At the end of the class, Raphael held up the small, crooked vase they had made together. "It's not perfect, but it has potential," he said, looking at Clara with a smile. She knew he wasn't just talking about the vase. And for the first time she felt that maybe, just maybe, he was right. The morning was clear and fresh on the day Clara and Raphael decided to renew their vows. It wouldn't be a grand ceremony, just something intimate with a few close friends. There was no extravagance, but every detail was imbued with meaning. Clara adjusted her simple dress in front of the mirror while Sophia, who had insisted on helping her get ready, made the final touches to her hair. "You look beautiful," Sophia said with a warm smile. "And more importantly, you look at peace." Clara turned to her friend, holding her hand. "I think I finally am. Not because everything is perfect, but because I've chosen to believe it can get better." Sophia nodded, giving her hand a squeeze before leaving to give Clara some space. She took a deep breath, looking at her reflection in the mirror. This wasn't just the start of a new phase in her relationship with Raphael, but also with herself. In the small clearing of the park, Raphael was waiting for her. He wore a white shirt and simple trousers, but what stood out was the expression on his face. It was a mix of nervousness and joy, something Clara hadn't seen in a long time. When he saw her, his eyes lit up, and he took a deep breath, as if seeing her for the first time. "You look beautiful," he said as Clara came to stand beside him. "And you look different," she replied with a slight smile. The officiant began the ceremony with a few words about new beginnings and the power of forgiveness. When it was time to exchange vows, Raphael went first. He held Clara's hands and looked deeply into her eyes. "Clara, I can't promise I'll never make another mistake," he said. "But I promise to always be honest with you. I promise to keep fighting for us, for everything we've built, and for everything we can still become." Clara felt tears well up, but they weren't tears of pain. When it was her turn, she took a deep breath before speaking. "Raphael, I don't know where we'll be in 5 or 10 years, but today I choose to believe. I choose to believe in us, in the love we still have, and in what we can build together." The vows weren't perfect, but they were sincere, and that was what mattered. When the officiant declared them renewed in their commitment, their friends applauded softly, respecting the intimacy of the moment. Later, as they walked hand in hand through the park, Clara felt something different. It wasn't euphoria or the sensation of a happy ending. It was something deeper. The certainty that true love isn't perfect. It's shaped by imperfections, by falls, and by the choices to keep going, even when everything feels lost. Raphael gave her hand a gentle squeeze, interrupting her thoughts. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, looking at her. "That, for the first time in a long while, I think we're ready for a new beginning," she replied, smiling. And with that smile they moved forward, one step at a time, but together. Do you believe love can truly survive a betrayal? What would you do in Clara's place? Give a second chance or move on. Every decision has its price, and Clara and Raphael's journey reminds us that rebuilding something broken takes courage, vulnerability, and, above all, difficult choices. Are you ready to find out how this impactful story ends? Subscribe now to follow this emotional journey of love and forgiveness. Don't miss the upcoming chapters that will move you and make you reflect on the true meaning of starting over.